Welcome back to Theology for the Unwanted. I'm Dan Tilson, your host. And over there, we've got John Byram. Say hi.
How's it going?
Good, man. We're doing things a little bit different today. We're recording from my basement.
From your new basement.
My new basement,
New
yeah.
basement.
So for those of you who have been listening, normally I go down to, 45 minutes south of Washington, D.C., and there's a nice little recording studio. Why are you laughing?
Because you don't have to drive 45 minutes. And if you're coming from work, you still have to drive 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Depending upon traffic, of course.
Anyway, new basement's not really set up. So I'm on the floor. John is in my nice armchair. And
It's being a gracious host.
Yeah. I don't know if it feels any different for people who are listening, because hopefully the audio quality is more or less the same. But I got to say, normally we have headsets on and we can see like all kinds of meters and bars running up and down the computer screen. And this is literally just me and John facing the same wall and talking to it.
It's a beautiful wall.
Okay. Thank you. I had it painted this week.
You did have it painted.
So
the beautiful blue.
Tell me about your week.
It's been a crazy week. Work's been insane. I've been doing my job. I've been doing a little graphic designing too, which is kind of cool. Had a really cool opportunity to grab brunch with some friends this past weekend, which was really cool. Before Snowmageddon 3.0 comes over.
That's right.
By
the time this is published, everyone will be snowed in.
Yeah,
across the eastern seaboard, I think.
This is true. Anywhere between 1 to, I think I saw like 147 inches, anywhere in between there. No, it's like 26 inches is what I was reading.
I didn't tell you this, but we were actually, there's a bunch of us that do ministry in DC. Mm-hmm. There's a friend of ours that we've known for a really long time. She got housing in Washington, D.C. And we were going to help move her, her remaining belongings from the Midwest out here. And we're planning to make that drive. So I actually had a flight for tomorrow to Ohio that I just canceled.
Oh.
Because there's no way we're going to get back here safely.
No.
Otherwise I'd be sleeping in a U-Haul in West Virginia somewhere for like the next week.
Sounds like a really good story though.
I thought about it, man, but I do not have enough winter clothes to get me through that.
Yeah, you haven't unpacked it yet. You're still unpacking here, right?
I want you to know that when I first found out that we were going to be doing this trip and there was a threat of snow, me being type A, I actually mapped out every Chick-fil-A, Wendy's, McDonald's along the entire 600-mile route.
Where was this on our road trip with our friend Brandon down to Atlanta? There was no Chick-fil-A marking on the maps or anything like that. I think we stopped at a Raising Cane's.
It was good.
It was good. Oh, it was in Gaffney, South Carolina. Why is Gaffney, South Carolina famous?
So there's a giant peach.
Yes.
Like the water tower itself is like an oversized peach.
Yeah.
And it's famous because this old TV show called House of Cards.
Is it considered old now?
Yeah, it was more than a decade ago.
It was so good. Go on.
Okay. Anyway, tell me about...
Okay. So I met up with some friends for brunch over the past weekend. And funny enough, your book came up. One of my friends I was with is very well aware of your story and your book and everything. So that wasn't the issue. But his friend, who I've known also since the time I've known my other friend, has moved away. He's going to school. He was becoming a doctor kind of thing. He came back to hang out for a couple of days. So we all went out to catch up on old times. Also, super devout Catholic.
All good signs so far.
All good signs. Thumbs up. Has a very Catholic name too, but I'm not going to dox him. So we're having a conversation and, obviously the ceremony in Antwerp came up, the wedding in Italy, all that fun stuff came up. And he started asking questions like, oh, well, not in the eyes of the church. And I was like, I didn't say in the eyes of the church. I'm talking about a blessing ceremony in the eyes of the church, but it's a blessing ceremony. I didn't talk about a sacramental marriage. I talked about a marriage. I'm pretty sure they're well aware. And that led to a conversation of actually a lot of points that you touch on in your book for a lot of arguments that people have against the idea of having LGBT people in the church or allowing people to be open about their sexuality in church. So it was a very healthy conversation. We went back and forth in the conversation after brunch. No mimosas, I'm pleased to announce. We're all doing dry January. But a very healthy discussion led to him wanting to read your book. So I was very happy that in that moment, I could possibly not really change his mind, but give him the want to possibly be open enough to hear the amazing message in your book of not just for LGBT Catholics, but also divorced Catholics and other Catholics that feel like the church is kind of pushing them out the way because of their situation. And that's why I kind of really tried to frame it for him as, and that's what really kind of piqued his interest. So he's going to get a copy of the book. He's going to read, he's going to let me know what he thinks about it. And I'll be more than happy to share it with you. But I think that's one of the great things that we talk about all the time on this podcast is to share your story, share your experiences. And my experience of doing this podcast with you and the book launch and just seeing how this is impacting everyone, I want to share that same energy with everyone else. So I thought that was a great opportunity. I was very happy that he was really receptive to it. So,
it's so funny. A lot of people have this assumption that writing a book is a money-making proposition.
Oh, no.
No, there is no free market enterprise, anything. Like, I can't even believe that publishing houses still exist, although I'm very thankful, especially to Paulus Press.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody asked me how much are you making on every book? And I said, it's got to be dozens of cents.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, the funny thing is, right? So I was going to make a joke saying I'll charge you my marketing fee later, but this is funny because I'm the same guy that refused to take ownership of a car I bought at a dealership because it still had the dealer stickers advertising their dealership on the car. I either said you take two grand off the cost of the car, or you take the stickers off. Take your pick.
We're not going to go into this, but when you first got here, you told me how you threatened to sue someone today and that you would represent yourself. It's fine.
It is because I know. Look, we
guys, don't mess with Jon. Don't mess with Jon.
My argument is solid and backed up in the rules of the situation, and I have the documentation to prove it. I don't need to pay someone to say what I already can say.
It's so funny because in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about there's two mindsets when it comes to using your time and your talents. You got like the chronos, which is chronology.
Mm-hmm.
Event A happens and event B happens, then Jon sues you and then he represents himself. And then hopefully he wins. So there's chronos, which is kind of the human mentality. It's like, how are you using your time? How are you using your talents? Are you producing something from it? And then there's Kyrios, which is God's time, right? And we were joking about, actually, I promise you I wouldn't bring this up, but here we are. I love it when Italians say, we're just wasting time. Like God wants you to just waste time because in their mind and their culture, wasting time is wonderful. But to the American minds, can't comprehend it.
I mean, most of Europe's on a 4-day work schedule. America's like, no, we can't do that. If we do 4 days, we have to work 30 hours a day. It's like that. No.
we have a very deep and somewhat difficult topic tonight. But before we get into that, I don't know if you saw that the Italian prime minister was asked about how she's going to respond to the United States over these threats on Greenland.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see that?
I've seen a lot about this topic. I think I may have, but it's not ringing a bell.
The prime minister was like, what do you want me to do? Storm McDonald's?
I did see that.
And
yes.
It was just the perfect response. We're not commenting on the situation in Greenland here. We're just pointing out that their way of responding to things is not our way of responding to things.
This is very true.
Oh, okay.
That's what makes the world very interesting.
So tonight we're talking about a difficult reality in the church, which is there has been a lot of abuse in our history. And thankfully, it does seem like we are starting to get a handle on things. However, we're going to look at this through the perspective of a theologian. So law enforcement, judges, administrators, they're responsible for putting into place protections, right? Don't be in a room without, several people who are going to be basically don't do stupid stuff.
Yeah.
And if you do, you might have to pay a price for it. That is not what we want to look at. Theology for the Unwanted, we are talking to people who have felt pushed away by the church, and we're going to try and understand what is it that theology has to offer here. So we're not discounting all of the rules and the legal procedures here. We're focusing on what can theology now add to that. And so I want to say, although statistically, most of the listeners are not going to have to face a problem in their parish. But enough people will that this is worth talking about. So how do we give you the tools without casting suspicion, right? Like, I don't want you to listen to this episode and go home and be like, everyone at church is evil. Because I hear that enough, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're trained from a young age to assume the best in everyone. We're not trying to change this idea that everyone is bad and there's a handful of good people. It's in reality, there's a lot of really, really great people out there, and there's a few bad actors, unfortunately.
It is, quite honestly, much worse than a few bad actors. But point taken that we don't want you to have suspicion towards people in your parish. We want you to have the tools to understand if somebody is vulnerable and then how you move past that. So the example that John and I read through before doing this episode, it's called the CIACE report, the CIASE report in France. So this is in 2021. It's the independent report on the situation in the church over there. And the Catholic Church has accepted the figure of 330,000 child victims in France alone.
Yeah.
Right. So France, not the biggest country out there.
Not the biggest.
We're substantially larger. You can only imagine that if what you see in France is representative of what has happened here, then we should be terrified. Because 330,000 people is larger than the city of Cincinnati. It's larger than Orlando. And that's something that has not got enough attention. So, John, you and I have talked about confession a lot. In fact, our second episode, we actually dedicated to both good and bad confession experiences and how we can help people move past, like, looking at that person in the wooden box and thinking, okay, I'm talking to a judge.
You see someone in the box? I go behind the screen so I can't see anybody.
Yeah, it's almost like you're going through a fast food drive-through.
Yeah, it kind of feels like that sometimes.
Well, I guess that brings up the question, how would you even really know if you're having a bad drive-through experience? Like, what if you go to the same drive-through every day, or maybe not every day because there's nutrition guidelines, but like, how would you know if you're having a good or bad experience?
Nutrition guidelines never stopped anybody. Let's be
Okay.
clear. I feel like it's this. Honestly, you're right. If that's all you know is the experience from that one drive-through, you wouldn't know if it's good or bad. You have to have something to compare it to, right? Or, I don't know, if you're not living under a rock, you can kind of see how the rest of the world interacts with each other, right? Use your own experiences of interacting with other people and think to yourself, hey, did what I just experienced in this drive-through, is that a positive or a negative? Like, we can, while the English language is not very tonal in the sense of describing what a word is, it's tonal in the sense of we can provide additional context to what we're trying to say. Example, would you believe me if I said, Dan, you're one of my really good friends? Or if I said, Dan, you're one of my really good friends. It's the same
definitely
message.
option 2.
Yeah. It's the same words, but the tone of the words is what provides the context, right? So if I go through a drive-through, it buzzes and the person in there, and they go, what do you want? We're already off to a bad start, right?
Yeah.
But if I roll up and they're like, hi, welcome to X, Y, and Z, what may I get for you today? Or what would you like today? Or how can I help you? And my response would be, oh, thank you so much. I would love a number blank with blank, blank, and blank, and blank. Great. Would you like anything else? No, I think that will do it today. Well, your total comes to blank. Thank you so much. And please pull to the first window.
Yeah. So
that's a good experience, right?
It's a good experience, but bringing it to confession.
Oh, yeah. I'll take two number twos of sin number 4. And just
we give like such a rhythm to it.
We do.
And I remember reading from moral theologian Fumagalli, whom we've quoted on many episodes, and talking about the abuse crisis specifically, that there becomes such a rhythm where you walk into the confessional and you're like, what's the first thing you do? Make the sign of the cross and bless me, Father, for I have sinned. There's not even, at least in my upbringing, there's not even really a variation of that. It's not a, hey, how's it going? I need your help. It's a, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. And then you're supposed to, what do you do after that?
It's interesting. So as a convert coming into the Catholic Church, one of the things I did is I heavily researched it, especially for my first confession,
Okay.
on what I am and not supposed to do. And the crazy thing is every piece of literature I read said you do not greet the priest when you go in. You go in and you start with the sign of the cross and you just get to it. Every single cell phone application that helps you with an examination of conscience or as an aid in confession to help you track everything, right? Also says you go in, the first thing you do is the sign of the cross and you just get to it. I remember one time I went into the confessional, I said, "Hi, Father, how are you today?" I got no response.
What?
No response.
If I say, "Hi, how are you?" to the drive-through.
That's different though, right? The high schooler on the other end probably loves the fact you acknowledge them.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's kind of, you know, like you said, it's structured. We're trained to just get to it.
Well, we also give, ever since the Middle Ages, we've added this sort of like, give me a number, give me,
Yeah.
like we want to assign digits and values to it, which is, that kind of goes back to how we opened up with the chronos,
Mhm.
right? The human intention is deeply tied to value, output, outcome. That's not God's time though. And that is unfortunately a development that, even though it is meant to help us, it often hinders us in confession, because we walk in and there's a call and response, right? And the problem is that in a vulnerable situation, so if I'm walking into the confessional and I have a deep secret and I'll do anything to prevent that secret, theoretically, confession's the best place, right? At least on paper, it is supposed to be the best place to share your secret. That is not how it always works out.
It's true.
But when you have such a rigid rhythm to the responses, right? Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It has been 7 weeks or 7 days or 7 minutes since my last confession. There's this sort of obligation, right? You now feel like you have to say a number and a time and a place. And to the person on the other end of the screen or the wooden box, there becomes this sense of, you're here fully out of your own will and you really want to tell me how many minutes and you really want to tell me how many times. Again, these questions, these forms, this rigidness, this rhythm, it works most of the time. But when you have a bad apple
Mhm.
that is on the other side of the screen and you have someone with a really bad secret, this tug of war where it's obligation and understood as obligation and then in turn consent, it becomes very confusing. And so the church has focused too much on the chronos and not as much on the wasting time.
Mhm.
So when we looked at the CA's report, it talked about confession as the scene of the crime.
Mhm.
They interviewed hundreds of people, and confession was often seen as the place where the vulnerability became bad.
Mhm.
So what would you, like, as an outsider at one point and someone who has been part of the Catholic family for a long time, how is your opinion of confession and sharing sins? Like, how has that changed? And what advice would you give to someone that is in your shoes 15 years ago?
So in all honesty, the Protestant belief in you can just confess your sins to God, I think honestly from a selfish standpoint, yeah, it's definitely the easier way because you're praying to God, confessing your sins. It's always a different story when you have to verbalize it.
Mm.
It's even though if there's a screen there, it doesn't matter. You know there's a person behind that screen. And it's so difficult to actually say it. But I think there is a power in being able to say it.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you get that saying, it feels like, a boulder's off of your shoulders, rocks off your chest kind of thing. When you're actually able to say it and then you hear the words of forgiveness from the priest, there's that, it's not just like a spiritual release. It's a mental and a physical release too. Like you can almost feel like, yes, God has forgiven me. Like I feel the weight of the sin off of me because I verbally said it and I heard the words of forgiveness.
Yeah.
That's powerful. So I would say confession's great from a mental standpoint also, because how often in this life do we hear, I forgive you, and followed by the reassurance of unconditional love?
Yeah.
It's very rare nowadays. So when you do hear that in a religious setting, in confession, there's a reassurance that God knows we're going to make a mistake. God knows we're going to come back on our hands and knees begging for mercy. And God's going to give us the forgiveness that we know we're not worthy of, but we know he's going to give it to us because he loves us.
Definitely.
That's the beauty of it.
I love confession. I think of this one class that I was teaching for adult converts to the faith maybe 10 years ago. And it's so funny because we're in Washington, D.C., and everything is politics. I mean, what you get for dinner is politics. And they were having difficulty with understanding, like, why is the priest the one that we talk to? And so I was like, okay, what's going to relate to my audience here? And I brought up St. Paul's reference as reconciliation as ambassadors, right? That's a very like diplomatic political term. We've got 200 ambassadors in Washington, D.C. from all over the world. And in politics, receipts are important, right? If somebody's in trouble, I need to see the receipts and I need to see whose fault it is. If somebody has forgiven you for an offense or for political mishap or whatever, it's like, I need to know who's forgiving me because I need to know whether or not it matters.
Mhm.
And there's this really wonky term that we use in politics called plenipotentiary, which means like basically the ambassador represents the country,
Mhm.
and the sovereignty, think of like a king, the sovereignty of the king weirdly resides within the ambassador. And so when St. Paul says that the priest is an ambassador, right? And it's like, oh, then we do know we're forgiven.
Yeah.
And I feel like that would only work in Washington, D.C. classes, but it is.
It makes sense to me. But then again, DC.
Yeah. So I, in my nerdy political way, love the sacrament of confession because I can feel assured that Christ has really promised us, and I feel the promise of Christ's presence in there. But I also have had experiences I've talked about on the podcast where I was asked inappropriate questions, and it's actually our college chaplain that helped me get out of this. And he didn't know he was helping me out of this, but I was going to this one priest month after month, and the questions made me increasingly more anxious. I'm not sure if there was certainly no criminal line crossed, that's for sure. I'm not sure if a professional boundary was crossed with these questions, but they were wrong. And they definitely didn't make me feel the presence of Christ. So in our college chaplain's homily one day, college chaplain is the good dude in this story. He said, hey, if you ever have a bad confession, I give you permission to say, hey, Father, I came here for mercy. And after he said that to me, I felt a weight off my shoulder. And the next time I saw that, the priest in question, I said, hey, your questions make me anxious and I don't think they're helping me. And he immediately, I could see him like physically jump back in the couch. And he was like, oh, I'm sorry, I won't do that again. And so this is why I always tell people, if you are unsure if what you experience in confession makes you more vulnerable or if it was appropriate, just say, hey, Father, actually, I'm not ready to finish my confession today. I'm not ready to make my act of contrition and I'm excusing myself. And you don't owe anything more, right? And that way you're not casting suspicion on the priests. You are giving yourself the freedom to step out, to ask an adult, ask somebody else that you trust, be like, hey, was that normal? Was that a good drive-through experience? Or did they like totally mess up my order? And from there you can take that information and do what you have to do with it. But confession has changed a lot. At least the role and the place that we put confession in our lives has changed a lot over the centuries. Talk to me about your conversion story in the sense that I want to know the order that you had to do your sacraments.
Well, I was already baptized, so I didn't have to do that
Done.
again.
Check.
That was that was good to go.
First initiation done. What was your next initiation?
So, well, two of them happened at the same time during Easter Vigil. So the very next one would have been confession.
Okay.
And I think that was the one I was most anxious about I had a lot of anxiety going into it. I think I overanalyzed way too much. I went against recommendation of scheduling a time with a priest to do my first
The
confession.
Chronos.
Yeah. And because ultimately, having reflected on my life up until that point, I'm like, I would not want to say this in front of anyone face to face. So I did what you weren't supposed to do. I went to a parish and I researched the parish. I researched the priests. I went to a parish that had a bunch of young priests in it
Oh boy.
that would possibly better understand my 8.5 pages of sins I managed to rack up that I wanted to confess before going in the Easter Vigil. And I blindsided him. And obviously, thinking back on it now, I feel bad for the priest, but he handled it incredibly well. There was no judgment. In fact, it was the complete opposite experience of what I was expecting. I was expecting to be chastised. I was expecting to have like the hand rip through the screen and start pointing the finger at me. And it was the opposite of that. It was God's love and mercy coming through the priest saying, you know, we're happy you're joining the church. We're happy you're coming back to God. We're happy that, you're finally finding mercy and God's love in your life. And that was it. It wasn't a deep dive into each sin on all 8.5 pages. It was, look, I understand this was a very long journey. I understand you went through a lot to get to this point. And I love you for that.
That's incredible.
And I think my penance was like 5 Hail Marys. And it was the best 5 Hail Marys I've ever done in my life. And then that Easter Vigil was like a day or two later, and then boom.
And that's when you became fully a part of our Catholic family.
That is when I joined the Catholic family.
So you had already had baptism.
Mhm.
So we're talking about your initiation here. And what was the next step in your baptism sacramental? Sorry, in your initiation?
It was confirmation and Eucharist.
Okay. So you said that correctly. You said it, baptism, confirmation, Eucharist. However, what you really did, what were the order of your sacraments? Baptism, and then...
It was a sacrament of reconciliation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not initiation.
No, it's not, but they're like, you have to do it.
So we actually snuck that in there in the 13th century. Yes, we already had confession, but confession is for healing brokenness.
Yes.
Right? Reconciliation, sins can be forgiven. Venial sins are forgiven through the Eucharist, through any sins forgiven through baptism. So Eucharist and baptism are actually also sacraments of reconciliation. However, over the centuries, we greatly shifted that. We moved that. But we didn't sneak confession into the initiation process until the 13th century. And it was only in 1910 that it became a prerequisite for receiving the Eucharist. Did you realize just how contemporary, how modern that rule is?
From my studies in the Catholic Church and how the church has changed over time, it shouldn't surprise me, but it kind of does.
Yeah. So instead of understanding you as like a spring chicken when you come for confirmation, we make sure you understand your brokenness and your wrongness first, right? Now, theologically, that's not wrong. However, that's not part of your initiation.
Yeah.
So it's something to be aware of how deep in our psyche we might accidentally be putting this sort of vulnerability onto you, and we may not even know it.
I mean, it's a very vulnerable experience because, again, you have to verbalize everything you've done wrong.
Well, have you ever challenged a priest in confession?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I can distinctly remember one time at a parish I would only go to because their Saturday confession was so much more convenient than anyone else. But this parish I would go to, and the priest was known for arguing with people. I kid you not, I'm in line and there are sisters from a religious order in there as well. There are 3 confessionals. Bless the church for putting the name tags on who's in what confessional. And I didn't realize, but like the first time there was a sister in front of me and that priest's door opened and she said, "Please, my child, go before me. She was sneaky. I know what she was doing now. But the priest was not forgiving, was not showing God's mercy. And in fact, would chastise, like not chastise to the point of learning from your sins, not the point of trying to make you do better or help you realize you need to do better, but chastise you for like, you know, in college, it was very common for those of us in the Catholic campus ministry to go to confession weekly.
Yeah, it was.
You know, a lot of us wanted to go to daily mass.
And we were really lucky to have such a good priest too.
We did. But for us, it was normal to go every week. This priest, one, chastised me for coming every week. I said, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been a week since my last confession." He said, "A week?" And I was like, "Yes." He was like, "Why a week?" And I said, "Because I'm preparing myself to receive the Eucharist on Sunday." And he goes, "Why not come back after 2 weeks?" And I said, "Because I did an examination of conscience and I realized I needed to go to confession. I don't want to receive the Eucharist and sin." And he goes, "Well, don't you think you're being a little too scrupulous?" I was like, "No, I'm examining my conscience." He goes, "Well, I don't think it's necessary." I said, "Well, I do. And last time I checked, I'm coming here for God's mercy."
It's funny because if someone's trying to help you get over a legalistic mindset, then that's probably not the right way to do it.
Yeah.
I remember this one priest, Father Fabrizio, and I came in and did the whole, like, "Bless me, Father. It's been, 2 weeks since my last confession." And he goes, "Why do you silly Americans always tell me how long it's been since your last confession? No, really. 1 minute, 10 lifetimes. I don't care."
I love that so much.
But again, the mindset is this: when you enter the liturgy, you're wasting time. Right? You're not supposed to think about what you're producing, and that's just not what I'm conditioned to do. I'm conditioned to think about like changing the oil in my car every 3 months or 6 months now that it's synthetic.
Every 5,000 miles, please.
Okay.
Triggered PTSD right there. When you
I know, right? Because I just got the message to go to the dealership anyway. So we have this weird idea about justice in the confessional, which I think makes it difficult for people to come with a full spirit of openness because they're afraid of God's justice, right? And if you are vulnerable, if you have a deep secret, if you have something that you must absolutely make sure that nobody outside of the confessional knows, you're in a little bit of a desperate situation.
Yeah.
And the virtue of justice can be scary, partially because I think we have made it that way. I mean, have you ever thought about what the virtue of justice means in confession? So in the catechism, it, it immediately talks about governing our relationships. Justice is the virtue that governs our relationships, defined as the constant and firm will to give God and our neighbor what is due to them. Remember how we talked about like that risk of, we get in too much of a formula and then as a potential victim, you feel like you have to do something. Something is due. You owe something. And to the person who is taking advantage of you, it appears like consent. Right? The risk is that we have made the virtue of justice so much of a formula that we have forgotten that it's actually a relationship.
Yeah.
So the way that theology, or at least moral theology, wants to talk about the virtue of justice is respecting the vulnerability of the person and respecting their relationship to you. I looked at theologian Catherine Fino. She actually specializes in how theology responds to disabilities. And she's pointed out, along with Elaine Thomaset and many others, that a long time ago in the church, the virtue of justice was actually stripped away from the sexual teaching. So if we're in the confessional and the virtue of justice is respecting the vulnerability of the person and respecting their relationship to you, you had a really good point earlier. Like there's a lot of different ways that we can understand someone's right relationship. I think you brought up sports, right?
Yeah. So the discussion we had prior was obviously if confession's being used as a way to for these bad actors to use theology to manipulate victims, it's not just the thing I want to point out is it's not a religion only problem. There's bad actors in
Everywhere.
a lot of different areas of life. And the one thing that I can recall is having been, someone who played sports a lot as a kid, there's a practice. I'll call it a practice in sports that I've never liked. From the time I was a kid to middle school to high school to college to this day, I don't like it. I've never understood why it's culturally accepted. The idea of the coach smacking the butt of a player who did a good job. Why?
Attaboy.
But my thing is like, what message does that send, right? Like, I remember being 6, 7 years old, being at a community rec center playing basketball, and I'd make a shot during practice and coach come up and smack my butt and say, hey, good job. I don't know this guy. He's a volunteer who got assigned to my team and I got assigned to his squad. I don't know who he is, but it's culturally accepted for some reason that this grown adult who's in charge, who's been put in authority of these kids on his team, that he can go and smack them on the rear end. Now, if we're walking down the street and someone comes up and smacks your butt or my butt, we're turning around and be like, what are you doing? But if that takes place on a basketball court, on a soccer field, it's okay. It's weird. Another example, let's say a player pulls a muscle and they need to stretch it out. It's a prime opportunity for a bad actor to take that moment of vulnerability because, again, adult volunteer, child willingly participant in a situation where they need an adult, a bad actor can use that moment, just like in a confessional, to exploit this victim.
The church is learning how to judge the symbol behind the action. So remember when we talked about that whole handshake thing? And it's like, objectively, a handshake looks like a sign of friendship. But what if the way I go in for the handshake is actually like a sign of dominance?
It's aggressive.
So the church is learning that it's not just the external, it's the intention behind it as well. We actually, believe it or not, used to do that. And then after the Protestant Reformation, we got a little bit more legalistic. And then we were like, intention not matter. There's objectively good, objectively bad. No, it's a whole package of right and wrong.
Yeah.
So in the scenario where I think you mentioned like a physical therapist helping someone stretch, on the surface, they're doing their job. They're performing a moral good. They're helping you through an injury, whatever it is. But if they have any sort of intention of rupturing that professional relationship, okay, the virtue of justice is a relationship. So it's respecting your vulnerability and respecting their relationship to you.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out is the other power dynamic in this is the position of authority, right? The priest is in a position of authority theologically. The coach is in position of authority as the adult figure on a youth team. The therapist or doctor is in the position of authority to practice medicine on a patient. Right? That's where the trust breaks, is a lack of communication on what's happening, right? If you go to a doctor, they're going to say, hey, in order to do this examination, this is what I need to do. Are you okay with that? That is what needs to be done in general. Consent. Let the person know that this person in authority, it needs to do something that they recognize may be in a gray area, but for their position, it's justified, but they need to let you know.
I think the rules that I've seen put in place over the past 2 decades, I don't know, we're making some strides. I'm not convinced we're actually making very many strides, but we're inching forward and screening people better and making sure that adults can't do stupid things. Or if you catch someone doing something stupid, usually there's a mechanism to either have the police jump in and investigate or for someone to lose their job. These are good things. But theology deals with the really complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where it's not black and white, but it's like, it's gray. And one thing I know is that we gaslight ourselves when you are in a position where someone is asking you inappropriate questions in the confessional. I want to believe that they're asking me these questions for a really good reason. And so that partially explains why I played along with answering these very intrusive inquiries I was getting from the priest month after month. I played along because I trusted the process.
Yeah.
And it, it even today, I'm like, maybe he was just dumb. Maybe he, no, I mean, like, it's honestly something that, okay, so I see the face that you're making because you're like, don't doubt yourself here, right? But even when I was talking with colleagues in the Holy See about this, I was like, hey, I had these experiences in confession. And I had these experiences with a priest playing games with me, talking about like darts and Scrabble and stuff, but no other adults were. And it went on for like years, right? The immediate response from one of my colleagues was, oh, you were being groomed. And the reason why it didn't go further was because the priest determined that you were not vulnerable enough. And for a brief second, I was like, that's real clarity. And honestly, that's what I suspected. And then 10 seconds later, I'm like, wait a minute. He just made a pronouncement of judgment unofficially, informally, on somebody he's never met, and he wasn't there. And basically, I created all this doubt. And I think that is normally what happens to someone who's vulnerable. And so, to an extent, as someone who thankfully nothing bad happens, I don't want to say it doesn't matter. What am I trying to say about this? This is so difficult. Professional boundaries were crossed, and I'm sure of that. And I want to see the church hold people more accountable. But that's not what theology does. Theology looks at helping someone understand their relationship. And so the right thing to do is to step out and ask people, like, hey, is this the proper relationship that I should expect? You and I talked a lot about how when we were in college, remember there was this culture of like sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice.
Yes.
Right? Deny yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There's a lot of theological good in that. But let me read this sentence to you from the CA's report. The use of the Virgin Mary, quote, who says yes to everything as an unconditional figure of obedience. Such distortion is based on a denial and a misappropriation of the evangelical meaning. I think that when we reduce somebody to like a radical obedience, we can't understand it as, we can't isolate it, right? We have to look at like the whole person, their whole mission. So we look at Mary's life. It's yes, that yes was extremely important. But if we are just hyper focusing on that one moment, then actually what we've done is we've turned Mary into a puppet.
Yeah.
I looked up, we've spent a lot of time looking up Greek words. This time I looked up a Latin word. I was like, where the heck did the word obedience come from? And I found that it was ab audire, towards, to listen. And I'm not talking about like listen, like follow instructions. It means like actually hear them, right? So theology is not supposed to be legal. It's, Jesus said, Peter, feed my sheep. It was a command. If Peter was listening, he might have literally put food on the table for the sheep. But he was more interested in the theological obeying, which meant caring for Christ's people. You had mentioned something about we're all sheep, and clergy, people in positions of power, they go to school for how to take care of dumb sheep.
Mm-hmm. Well, not so. When I say dumb sheep, it's not dumb in the sense of, we know as humans that sheep are not capable of critically thinking like humans, right? It's a metaphor. It's sheep need to be told where to go, how to do things, when it's time to eat. They need to be led. That's why the analogy that the church uses of a shepherd herding their flock is so vivid. It's a shepherd learns through experience, through passed down tradition, on the best way of herding sheep. In this analogy, the priest went to seminary where they learned the church's history on how to teach theology to the people that are coming in, whether it's the first time person coming in, whether it's an atheist or agnostic who stumbles in through the doors, or whether it's someone who's been going to church every Sunday, every holy day of obligation, every single day for the past 38 years and is a seventh generation Catholic. They can trace their lineage all the way back to St. Francis of Assisi when he stripped his robes in the middle of the city square. It doesn't matter. They're taught how to, from a theological standpoint, herd their flock, to lead them to Christ in this sense. And because of that, because we as sheep recognize the priests go through this long process, we hold them on a higher pedestal. The term is a cult of personality. It's holding them as they're this figure in church who is ordained, who has that mark on their soul that they are representing Christ. Like, we recognize the clergy as the ambassador, like you're saying, that represents God. So when we go to confession, we know we're speaking to God's ambassador. We're speaking to God, right? So because of that, we as the sheep in this scenario are told to trust our priest.
Yeah.
We're told to trust people in leadership and authority without knowing their actual human intent. And that's where that vulnerability comes in. We're being vulnerable, and that's where bad actors come in to use it to manipulate. So if we're constantly being told to emulate Mary's yes, that blind obedience, always saying yes to God, and the priest represents God, you're always supposed to say yes to the priest then. That's the danger of it, is if the priest is acting in bad behavior and with bad intentions, and we are told to say yes and not question because they're our shepherd. We're not supposed to second guess them. We say yes. Then all of a sudden that confession where we just spilled our guts out, spilled our soul looking for forgiveness, can now be used as your penance is 5 Hail Marys, and I'm going to need you to come to my office once a week for a one-on-one spiritual guidance.
Any sacrament, if it's living out the virtue of justice, it's got to touch the vulnerability of the people.
Yes.
And vulnerability is not something we have to go seeking out. I know we hate weaknesses, but the reality is all of us were really young at some point, and we needed to hold our parents' hands when we crossed the street. God willing, most of us will grow old. And once again, we'll have physical frailties. But there are many other ways. There are moments of having secrets. Or if you're, I really like to watch 60 Days Locked Up. But I often, because of the theology brain, think about how vulnerable they are. There's not a choice in their lives. Once they're locked up, they don't have a choice over their schedule or their actions. The sacraments, if they are living the virtue of justice, they touch this.
Yeah.
No matter what the priest is talking about in confession. You brought up a really fun example, like the universal adapter, universal remote earlier.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing is that people who are trained in theology, who are leading their flock, when they're able to get in front of people and they're a really good homilist, right? That they're able to take the readings for Mass and really connect it, but in a very generic way, right? It's an art form. When you listen to music, you're listening to what the artist wants you to hear and what their message is, but the artist knows that may not be what the listener interprets.
That's why people love Taylor Swift.
I'm not going to comment on that.
Okay.
But yes, the people who love Taylor Swift has a message behind her songs, and the listener can interpret it the way they want to. Same thing with a homily, right? The example I gave you was the miracle at the wedding of Cana, right? Where Mary came to Jesus and said, they ran out of wine. This is a disaster. We need to do something. And what did Jesus say? My time has not yet come. I believe it was woman was at the end of it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you're just kind of like, you're reading this and you're hearing this from the homilist. She's like, wow, Jesus said no to Mary, but he can do that. He's God. But Mary said, essentially, I need you to do this. and Jesus turned the water into wine and the wedding was saved. What's the story? A good homilist is not going to say, oh, this is what you need to do from this story, right? In a lot of Protestant denominations, this is the story, this is what you need to do. They give you the answer. A good homilist will leave it open-ended so it impacts you in your life where you're at on your spiritual journey. I may be an alcoholic who drinks way too much wine. I may listen to that story in the homily and go, they ran out of wine because they drank too much. I need to look at cutting back my drinking. Other people may look at it and go, you know what? Mary recognized Jesus had a skill, had a talent, had a trait that would have been beneficial to the community at that time, and asked him to use that special skill, that trait, for the benefit of the community. Maybe I'm holding back on something that I know can be beneficial. Maybe I have the brain of a scientist and I need to put that to good use and maybe discover the cure for cancer or something, right? It's the knowing your trait. Same story, two very different messages because it meets those people in their place.
That's the idea of a universal faith. It touches everyone in their own situation and all at the same time. So as we close out here, what I'll say is that theologian Catherine Infantine, she reminded me that sacraments should make you feel the promise of the presence of God. And so I'm going to leave this episode as unsatisfying as I possibly can and tell you that you need to trust your gut. You need to be on the lookout for those around you in the pews, because if somebody is not able to experience the promise of the presence of God and they're vulnerable, then we need to do something about it. We need to help ensure that folks have the right theological training to understand that they're not reduced to a sort of blind obedience, but that we each have dignity. And unfortunately, most of the time, it's not black and white, it's gray. It's almost like imperceivable. So pray about this. Take your own vulnerabilities to God in prayer and reflect more on the virtue of justice, which is a relationship. It's about respecting and touching the vulnerability of others, and at the same time, your own proper relationship to them. We've received a lot of really good messages from listeners who have had bad experiences in the church over the years. Jon and I love reading your messages. We love learning from them as well. And we're also open to advice. And so I hope that this episode can act as some sort of inspiration for you and for others, and maybe start a further process of healing. Don't hesitate to reach out to us at theologyfortheunwanted.com. And Jon and I also check the messages on Instagram and TikTok at Theo Unwanted. So until next time, take care.